Tonight, clinging to power, Egyptian President Mubarak calls for a dialogue with the opposition, but protesters say it's too late. He must go. The U.S. urges a peaceful transition and begins evacuating American citizens from an Egypt in crisis. I'm Harry Smith. Also tonight, it's a high-tech battle. The revolution in Egypt started online, then the government pulled the plug, but the web is not the only medium for a message. And when a pinch of salt is probably more than enough.
From CBS News World Headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
Good evening. Katie is on assignment. Egypt's 82-year-old president is fighting for his political life tonight. For a seventh straight day, demonstrators filled the streets of Cairo, demanding that Hosni Mubarak give up the power he's held for 30 years. Mubarak named a new cabinet today and asked his new vice president to open talks with the opposition about giving them more freedom. But protest leaders met to plan the largest rally yet. They will try to put 1 million people on the streets tomorrow. And the army says it will not use force against them. The Egyptian government puts the death toll in a week of violence at nearly 100, but reports from witnesses indicate it is higher than that. An international exodus from Egypt is underway. Thousands of U.S. citizens are trying to fly out, and U.S. Marines have 2 ships standing by in the Red Sea in case they're needed to help evacuate Americans. In Washington, the Obama administration continues to call for a peaceful transition to democracy. We have extensive coverage tonight, including a team of correspondents in Cairo. We begin with Elizabeth Palmer, who has been covering the protest in the heart of Cairo. Elizabeth?
Good evening, Harry. Well, the protesters are still down in the square behind me. You may be able to hear them, several thousand of them. They've been chanting ever since quite a dramatic speech by Egypt's vice president on television a couple of hours ago, who offered talks with what he called all political forces on constitutional change. Last week, the vice president's offer might have sounded like victory for the protesters. Now, for this crowd, it's just not enough. Tell anyone who orders you to fire on us, no, the demonstrators chanted. We are your people. People who have found a voice and a place to call their own. Liberation Square has become, as one demonstrator called it, the moral heart of Egypt.
He will be here until he gets out.
The atmosphere is a mixture of jamboree, mass picnic, and religious festival. Everyone, right down to the very youngest, understands the goal. Leave Mubarak. One group of lawyers is here because, says Ayman Gawani, they are fed up with corruption in the courts.
The government not respect the people in Egypt, don't respect anything in Egypt, the law and the people.
As dusk fell, it was clear the official curfew was going to be completely ignored.
The people have declared this essentially a Mubarak-free zone. Ringed by the army, the police pushed back. This is the only place in Egypt where there's true freedom of expression.
It's certainly not getting any coverage on state television, which broadcasts business-as-usual pictures of the president swearing in his reshuffled cabinet. But the new ministers are all Mubarak old guard. Unacceptable to angry Egyptians demanding a fresh start. One man who wants to offer just that is Mohammed El-Baradei, Egypt's bookish Nobel Prize-winning diplomat who fought his way into Tahrir Square over the weekend to address the crowd. Change is coming, he promised them. Baradei is at home on the world stage. As the longtime head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, he was a key figure in policing Iran's nuclear program. But after decades abroad, he probably doesn't have the grassroots support necessary to lead the country. His diplomatic skills, though, may make him ideal to smooth a political transition. A transition that tonight seems more likely than ever. Now, tomorrow morning, what's being billed as the Million Man March is supposed to take place here in Tahrir Square. And it looks to us as if the soldiers around the square have pulled back their tanks to actually make room for this tsunami of a crowd that's expected. The army reiterated once again today that it wasn't going to use violence on the protesters, so that may even encourage more people to come.
Elizabeth, this is so interesting because here you have the army siding with the people in the street. Mubarak says he's not going anywhere. This is an enormous test of wills. Is there any way to predict how this is going to turn out?
Well, Harry, this is brinksmanship of the highest order, and so far the government has blinked twice. It offered a cabinet reshuffle, and then tonight we've heard that they're offering constitutional talks. Each time there's been a concession, the protesters have picked up momentum. So I would say, the way it looks tonight, these demonstrators are holding the high cards.
Elizabeth Palmer with us in Cairo tonight. Once again, thank you. At night, it gets even more dangerous in many parts of Cairo. Over the weekend, the police were nowhere to be found, forcing civilians to form their own patrols to protect property from looters. Today, officers were back on the streets, as Mark Strassman reports.
For better or for worse, the only police force Cairo has went back to work today. Hosni Mubarak's state police. Since last Tuesday, when protesters began battling police in the streets, dozens have been killed. Police trucks torched, police stations looted. Then last Friday, the police disappeared. For 3 days, not one cop protected the city of 18 million people, twice the size of New York. Jailbreaks freed thousands of inmates. Gangs ran wild. It's widely believed some looters were police. Today, the police are back, but the fear is staying put. Last night, we found worried residents armed with bats and machetes had organized a militia with in-your-face checkpoints. They vowed to strike back against looters.
People will die to go inside. Either we die or they die.
We saw police today only on Cairo's west side, in neighborhoods like Dowie. But just 1 mile away, across the Nile, lies Liberation Square and thousands of protesters. Soldiers are here, but police seem invisible, apparently too provocative. So tonight, the checkpoints will stay up. President Mubarak today replaced the interior minister who oversees the state police. Not likely to mean much to people now demanding radical change. Harry?
Mark, so the cops are back out on the streets again. What real difference does it make?
During the day, Harry, very little difference because the days are relatively quiet. It's the nights where many neighborhoods in the city become scary places. So tonight's a real test for these state police. Can they reclaim some confidence of people who have thought up until now they simply can't trust the people who are paid to protect them? Harry?
Mark Strassman, also in Cairo tonight. Thank you. It is a chaotic scene at Cairo's International Airport, jammed with foreigners trying to get out of the country, including thousands of Americans. Also part of our team in Cairo tonight is Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Lara Logan. Lara?
As we flew into Cairo's International Airport tonight, Harry, we were struck by how deserted the capital looked from the air. This is a city that literally never stops, and those streets are normally packed with people and cars and bustling with activity. But tonight, because of the curfew, they looked virtually empty.
It was a dramatically different scene earlier in the day as thousands of people jammed the roads leading to the airport, desperate to get out of the country. More than 1,000 Americans made it out on charter flights arranged by the U.S. Embassy, and another 1,000 are expected to leave tomorrow. One U.S. official told CBS News tonight there was panic and fear amongst those who came to the U.S. government for help.
We felt safe but very on edge.
Crowds of people overwhelmed airline officials at Cairo's International Airport.
We can't get anybody to help us.
Here you can see the frustration of some passengers, many of whom have been stuck for days. When we arrived tonight, people were still camped in the airport, trapped by the crisis.
By the end of tomorrow, some 2,500 Americans should have been evacuated, and the U.S. Embassy says they're expecting more and more requests. But it's still only a tiny fraction of the more than 75,000 Americans living in Egypt who are registered with the U.S. Embassy, and that's just officially registered.
So, Lara, if I'm an American citizen, I'm in Cairo, I get to the airport, what is the process? How do I get out?
Americans are being told to come to the airport, to Cairo's international airport, with their passports and basically to get in line. They really have no idea where they're going. They can't plan in advance or make arrangements. There are a number of different destinations where they could be sent, from Athens to Istanbul to Nicosia and Cyprus. Certainly for people who are living in Egypt, living in Cairo, who maybe have to get out with their whole family and really have no idea when they're going to be able to return home, this is not an easy time at all. It's a very difficult situation.
Lara Logan in Cairo. Thank you. In Washington, the Obama administration is weighing its words very carefully in this crisis. Chip Reed is at the White House with the latest. Chip, good evening.
Well, good evening, Harry. The Obama administration is walking a very fine line here. On the one hand, they strongly support the protesters, but on the other hand, the last thing they want is for Egypt to descend into chaos. So here is the basic policy position of the Obama administration right now. First, the administration is calling for, quote, an orderly transition to a government that respects the rights of the Egyptian people. Second, they are not calling on Mubarak to step down. Third, the White House is calling for free and fair elections in Egypt this fall, elections in which Mubarak may or may not be on the ballot. Now, Harry, it may seem strange that they're calling for a transition to a new kind of government, but at the same time, they're saying that Mubarak may be able to stay around. Well, the White House says they're being very adamant about this. They're saying they're not going to take sides, that on principle, they're going to continue to say it's up to the Egyptian people, not the United States, to decide who the Egyptian leader should be. Harry?
Chip Reed at the White House tonight. Thank you. The crisis in Egypt continues to affect markets around the world. Anthony Mason is our senior business correspondent. Anthony, what is going on with the price of oil?
Well, the oil jumped again today, Harry, and the crisis effectively is adding a fear premium to the price. Crude is now at a two-year high, $92 a barrel. Egypt itself is not a major oil exporter, but Egypt's Suez Canal is a key oil transit route. Nearly 2 million barrels a day are shipped through the canal, and another 1 million move through the Sumed pipeline that also runs through the country. Any disruption there would divert tankers around the southern tip of Africa, which is a much longer and more expensive route. But at this point, most analysts think that's unlikely to happen.
All right, I'll give you a hypothetical. What happens if this crisis continues and or if this crisis begins to spread?
That's the contagion fear. If this goes beyond Tunisia and Egypt and spreads to the major oil producers in the Middle East, then it could certainly have an effect on the world's economy and on our economy. That's the worst case scenario, but that could send oil prices skyrocketing, which could ultimately put the brakes on our recovery. Harry.
Anthony Mason, thank you for your expertise. The crisis in Cairo is also a threat to some of Egypt's national treasures. Soldiers have arrested about 50 men caught trying to break into the National Museum. On Friday, looters damaged 2 mummies along with 75 ancient artifacts. Experts say the artifacts can be restored and soldiers will stay there to protect against another break-in. The uprising in Egypt began online. Still ahead, why the government's decision to pull the plug on the internet may have backfired. And the assault on salt. Chances are you are eating too much of it. New federal guidelines next. As winters go, this one has been a beast, and another monster storm is on the way. It could end up dumping up to 2 feet of snow in places like St. Louis and Milwaukee before hitting the East Coast tomorrow. Today, an icy mix made roads across the plains dangerously slick. There were at least 200 weather-related crashes and at least 1 fatality. In the legal battle over President Obama's health care reform law, the score is now 2-2. A federal judge in Florida is the latest to weigh in, ruling today the law is unconstitutional because it forces people to buy insurance whether they want to or not. A judge in Virginia issued a similar ruling in December, but 2 other courts have upheld the insurance mandate. It seems quite certain this issue will have to be resolved by the Supreme Court. 2 out of 3 Americans are overweight or obese, an epidemic that is expected to send health care costs skyrocketing. Today, the federal government released new guidelines for a healthier diet. And as Michelle Miller reports, most of us are not going to like this. They start with cutting the salt.
I like salt. Joy Alessi makes no apologies for her taste in food.
Well, you know, I actually like sea salt and I like to dump a good handful in.
But the USDA is now urging Americans like Joy to wean themselves off excess sodium and improve their overall eating habits.
This is a science-based system, and it's focused on calories in and calories out.
The nation's new dietary guidelines urge us to double the amount of fruits and vegetables we eat. We get more than 800 calories from solid fats and added sugars. The guidelines say no more than between 200 and 300 calories of saturated fats. And they want us to double the amount of fish we normally eat. And drink water, not soda. At 81, Edith Williams could be the guidelines' poster child.
I never crave salt. I don't like a lot of salt.
Really?
Yeah.
You're in the minority.
Yeah.
The main goal? Reducing sodium consumption for half the population. People age 51 and older, African Americans, those suffering from certain chronic diseases, and children should consume just 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day, or about half a teaspoon. Guidelines for the rest of us remain at 2,300 milligrams.
We need to get the food industry on board.
Nutritionist Lisa Young says the problem is the salt that's already in processed foods.
And how many of us going to Super Bowl parties are going to eat 4 or 5 handfuls? So 3 handfuls of pretzels, and that's all your sodium for the entire day.
I want my 15 chips. 3, 4,
13, 14, 15.
No, I got one more. I think I could stick to this.
Okay, good. Most of us can't.
That's why the government is now pressuring food companies to cut the salt in their products or face regulation. Michelle Miller, CBS News, New York.
And for more on this story, all you have to do is go to our partner in health news, webmd.com, and search dietary guidelines. Coming up next, Egypt blacks out the internet. Could it happen here? The uprising in Egypt is a quintessential 21st century event, born on Facebook and other social networking sites, which led the government to cut off internet service. Science and technology correspondent Daniel Seberg reports on this desperate effort to keep a lid on dissent.
The blackout was a surprising move for a nation previously known for being open compared to other countries in the Mideast.
I think what's unprecedented is the degree we've never seen such a connected country like Egypt be disconnected from the internet.
Here's how it happened. In the United States, it's companies like Comcast or Time Warner that provide internet access. The Egyptian government told their internet service providers to shut down, causing Egypt to basically disappear off the internet map. Telecom Egypt went first, just after midnight Friday morning, and within 6 minutes, the 5 internet providers covering about 93% of the country went down and have not come back. Only 2 other countries have ever shut off so completely, Nepal in 2005 and Myanmar in 2007.
It would have to be something pretty dramatic for the internet to be shut down here.
But Congress is considering a bill to expand the president's authority.
The legislation says that the president would have the power to declare a cyber emergency, and then the White House, along with the Department of Homeland Security, would have the power to take control of certain key portions of the internet.
Holly Pickett lives in Cairo and says cutting off the online world may have backfired.
When that happened and people realized that the internet had been shut off and the government had done this to them, this really angered people.
But demonstrators also know that the internet can be a double-edged sword. Before the shutdown, this 26-page protest manual warned protesters not to circulate information on social networks for fear the government would be watching.
All of that can be very easily exploited by dictators of the secret police.
Now, people are able to get around the internet ban the old-fashioned way by using a landline to dial up a connection in another country, Harry.
Daniel, I'm reading, though, that some cell phone service has been restored there.
Yes, cell phones are back up, and actually Google is now offering a service that lets people turn a voicemail into an instant Twitter message. No internet required. So some interesting ways of trying to get around it.
All right, Daniel Seberg, thanks so much. Coming up next, remembering a movie composer whose music stole the show. We end tonight with a man who knew the score. because he wrote it. John Barry, who died over the weekend, wrote the music for more than 100 films. In 1962, John Barry helped introduce the world's most famous secret agent.
Bond. James Bond.
Adding that catchy guitar riff to the score of Dr. No. He would become Bond's unofficial composer, writing suave and exciting scores for 11 more 007 films. Barry's talents were no secret. He was one of the busiest composers in Hollywood. In a career that spanned 5 decades, he won 5 Oscars, his first in 1967 for Born Free. Others followed for sweeping epics like Out of Africa, and Dances with Wolves. Barry's formula for scoring a movie? You just follow the action. John Barry was 77. That's the CBS Evening News. Katie will be reporting tomorrow from Cairo. I'm Harry Smith in New York. Thank you for joining us. Good night.